let's talk big picture thoughts following Rutgers 26-23 victory at Virginia Tech on Saturday. Lots of overreactions on Sunday, both in the positive and the negative, for what this win meant, for what some people expected. See some fans out there upset Rutgers didn't get one AP vote in the poll. Want to talk about that. And also, just in terms of weighing the positives and the negatives from Saturday's win. And I just want to start with it's a win. And I think I've made this analogy before with, last year, a lot of people picking Rutgers to go 6-6. And then there would be a lot of concern, upsetness at times when they didn't play well. And it's like, it's a lot easier to pick a team to go 6-6 than it is to watch a 6-6 team. And I think you're seeing a little bit of that here as well, where Rutgers, obviously expectations are much higher this year. And the bottom line is they had an established lead. They were in control, not playing their best. And then they really made some mistakes. Both, we talked about it in the rapid reaction, both from the coaching staff, I thought, some decision making, and on the field. And they let Virginia Tech get back into it. But I really think, I'm not leaving this game with a negative connotation at all. It's college football. And unless you're a blue blood with elite talent, you can be an 8, 9, 10 win team and not look particularly good at times. And I think the overall point is that you're able to fight through it. And Shiano, I have obviously watched and posted his post-game press conference, and he was a little emotional and talking about, I think one thing that's endearing about him is he really does seem to equate life to football in the respect of the lessons they learned by fighting back and being resilient and overcoming adversity and all that. And there really is value to that as a team. And that's when things really can start to get cooking in terms of believing. And that was one thing going into this, Rutgers, this was their first real test. And as David Anderson very notably mentioned to me in our post-game exchanges, this is the first real opponent Rutgers faced since the bowl game against Miami. And, perhaps they even got a little fatigued, a little tired. They were coming off that bye week. Virginia Tech kind of hitting their stride, fourth game and fourth week. So there's a lot of factors there. But the bottom line is they overcame everything. And that is a huge positive. And as Rutgers fans, I think it's easy to forget so many years, so many times we've seen that game be a loss. And it wasn't. And I know some people are equating the 2006 win at North Carolina and how that almost fell apart. And Rutgers survived that game. And it ended up being a huge win in what was a tremendous season, with Rutgers starting 9-0, finishing 10-2, having that landmark year under Shiano. And it really, that early season game, changed the fate of the season. If they had lost that season may never have been close to happening. So it's very early in terms of digesting what this win means for the overall season. But anytime you can win ugly, anytime you can win after making some key mistakes, letting your opponent back in the game, and still being able to come out with a victory on the road against an ACC opponent, it's a P4 non-conference win. And just as Rutgers fans, I mean, I tweeted this last night, and I really didn't touch on it in the rapid reaction. There's a lot going on in my head, but it's what Shiano's done in his 2.0 since returning. Now 5-0 against former Big East foes that are now in the ACC. And of those 5 wins, only one came at home. So you won at Syracuse in his second year, 2021. You won at BC in 2022. You won at home against Virginia Tech in 2023. You beat Miami in the bowl game, and then you went on the road at Virginia Tech. That is one marker. It's not the only marker. It's not the top marker, but it is a marker of progress that this program has made. And I always look at this point going to Stuart Mandel, that, just egregious argument, terrible argument, talking about Rutgers being the worst expansion move in college football, in college athletics. And that point alone, to me, proves that it's the opposite, because Rutgers is above all those programs. Obviously, Miami is highly ranked this year and all that, but the fact that they've been able to go 5-0 against teams that traditionally beat them in the Big East, it shows being a Big Ten program has elevated Rutgers overall. Maybe they haven't had a ton of success yet in the league, but an average Big Ten team, an average ACC team, you take the Big Ten team pretty much all the time. And just in terms of the mentality that Rutgers has become, in terms of this physical team, this aggressive team on the defensive end, now can throw the ball, but a team that it's going to be a fight no matter what. They have an identity, and it's just great to see. It's great to see. And yes, we can nitpick and listen, I was on the record in the rapid reaction. I thought Shiano made it was. What was also funny is that I got a lot of comments. The fact that, Rutgers needs to finish games, right? And they can't relax. I don't think that that's what happened in the Virginia Tech game. I think what happened was that Rutgers actually was a little bit over aggressive offensively and with special teams. And then defensively was, in the prevent, got kind of conservative. Usually you see the opposite, in terms of the offense getting in the fetal position and just doing nothing but handing it off. We've seen that approach throughout Shiano's return in 2.0. So I think the confidence that he showed in the team in this win, for me, is a green flag in terms of what he really believes his team can be, because he was going for it and he was pushing the envelope. And I think that that's a really positive sign. I talked about this a little bit after the Akron game, how they opened it up in the passing game in that second half. And I think the way that they called the game, although you go back and say, well, I don't really agree with that call, and that's true, right? And maybe it was not the best decision. But I think if you look at it from a decision-making standpoint, it was the wrong decision with the right mentality in mind, right? And those are two separate things. But I think that Shiano showed that he believes in this team, and he thinks this team is very capable. And I think that that's very true. So to have those mistakes and to be able to overcome that adversity is just obviously so important to the overall ceiling of the season. And now here you are, you're 3-0, you come home, you have Washington coming in. It's a short rest for both teams. Washington beat Northwestern 24-5 pretty easily. They have lost to Washington State. Not the same team. I saw a tweet about, it's hard to believe that Rutgers is going to be favored against a team that was in the national title game last year. Well, that's the transfer portal era. You really can't look at it that way anymore because it's a new coach, completely new roster, still same name on the jerseys, but that's irrelevant, right? And every year is a different year, and this year everything is still on the table for this team, and that's what's most important. Obviously, it would have been a hugely deflating loss if they lost Virginia Tech, but they didn't. And that doesn't mean that they're, red flags in that game that are going to show up again. I think there's some concerns for sure, but those lessons learned in victory are a lot easier to digest and to process. And I think now your next four games, they're all winnable. They really, really are. And you have Washington at home. You go to Nebraska, that's going to be a very tough game, but they just lost at home to a much tougher than expected Illinois team. And then you come home and you got Wisconsin and UCLA. And none of those teams have looked great. Nebraska's looked the best. But you have a chance here. If you can stick together as a team, if you can move the ball through the air like they have, continue to improve on that run game. And I want to talk about that in a minute. And then the defense just continues to get better now that all the key pieces are back, other than obviously Mo Toure. There's a lot of reasons to believe that this team's just going to keep getting better. So I think any type of negative reaction, I get it, emotional. We all are there at some point. But anytime you can win on the road against a Power 4 opponent, it's a good day. It's a good win. And I think there's a lot that can be learned from it. Now, in terms of the run game, I do think Shiano talked about it after the game. Kyle Monangai, he had 26 carries. Sam Brown had 14, about 65-35. But in terms of Monangai, the way in which he runs, as often as he runs, he's always dealing with something, right? And I thought at times in that game, he looked less explosive, right? And I think the key was Sam Brown really looked good if he can just stay healthy. And I know that's a big if, but the two of them in tandem, and Shiano talks about the benefit of using Brown to keep Monangai less wear and tear for the end of the season. It's a real key. I think Sam Brown staying healthy and being a key contributor as that number 2 running back is a major storyline for this team to reach their ceiling. And I thought it was on display in that Virginia Tech game. So I think that was really encouraging, right? Because we had no idea what to expect after we missed the Akron game. And Shiano gave really no updates. We didn't know. So the fact that he showed up and he played well, he ran hard, he ran with authority. He's a physical guy. He's a different prototype. And Virginia Tech had a lot of trouble with him. Now, they did everything they could to stop Monangai, and that was part of it. And Monangai did have some good runs, I thought, particularly in both the ends of both halves, and obviously to ice the game. So I'm not concerned about him at all. All I'm saying is this team has more depth to it and more they're harder to prepare for. They have more options than last year by a long stretch. And that is another reason for optimism. Obviously, Ethan Kaliakmanis, I talked about his accuracies, over 72% in short to intermediate range passes now through 3 games, just markedly better than last year, and really gives this team another gear. And we haven't seen it yet. We haven't had to, and I hope we don't see it for a while. But that just shows, too, that this team has the capability to come back, that they can come from behind with a passing attack that we saw with Demir Miller and Ian Strong busting out. I mean, that was really fun to see. And obviously, Kenny Fletcher, he did have the fumble, but his presence in the pass game now, I mean, as a tight end, Rutgers hasn't had this in a very long time. So he's only going to get better. I think he's, super green in the position. He's going to make mistakes, but he's shown a lot of athleticism, a lot of potential. And just the way Rutgers, I thought Shiraka in particular, and, obviously that drive where they threw a lot and they got sacked and they weren't running the ball, but that's more philosophical. I think in terms of the balance that he showed in his play calling and some of the drives that he put together from a play calling standpoint was really encouraging. And you see now when he has real weapons, he's not afraid to use them. And that's an important differentiator from last year where he was ultra conservative, and a lot of that had to do with quarterback play. And now we're seeing where the quarterback he has confidence in, this offense is more dynamic. And that's only going to be that much more important as Big Ten play really gets into it now. Rutgers, 9 games left, 9 Big Ten games to go. And things are really going to get very interesting now. I tweeted after the game, I'd love to have 9 more wins that we can complain about. That means they would be 12-0. And Rutgers is going to be in a ton of close games. We talked about it before the season. They were projected the second most of any team to be in 9 one-score games. And there you go. We had our first one against Virginia Tech. There's a ton of opportunity here. Also, nothing was really mentioned. And I didn't even touch on it because it was just a lot going on in the rapid reaction. But Kaliakmanis, I mean, he was throwing up on walking off the field at one point yesterday. Media didn't ask Shiano about it, but they asked Kaliakmanis about it. And NJ Media, Advanced Media was there, and he said something to the effect Shiano always says to leave everything on the field, and I surely did. So you got to love his sense of humor and his leadership. But his ability to, literally gut it out, I thought was just so important for this team. And the confidence that the offense is going to have around him as a leader is, you can't understate that. Just in terms of defensively, I think with Tyreen Powell and Wesley Bailey, they made their impact on that game yesterday. Rutgers needed them back. And if they can stay on the field now, if they can get some rust off, and Bailey in particular, who was, played injured a lot last year, Powell, who was lost midseason, they're just so hugely important to the overall success of this defense. And you saw it on Saturday. So the fact that they're both back, it's just a huge help. Now, I think this is going to be a major test. And I actually said before the season, our season preview with the Night Report and Larry Kay, I thought Washington was the most important game of the season from the perspective if they lost Virginia Tech, you have to win that game to avoid going 2-3 if you lose to Nebraska. On the flip side, if you win the game, you have a chance to go 4-0 into October, and the ceiling for the season just goes up. And obviously that's true of any win. But I think if you can get through this game on short rest, I mean, they're not 100% healthy. Obviously, that availability report was better this week. But you have guys that are still working their way back, and you have guys that are fighting through stuff already. So, if you can get this win, right, when you have a lot of key players that are still working their way back, especially on the defensive end, it would just be such an important victory for this program, for perception, for national spotlight, for standing in the Big Ten, obviously starting 1-0 before you go on the road at Nebraska. But just in terms of what we think this team can accomplish this year, to go 4-0 in September and to head in October, that is a lot more manageable than maybe on paper. You thought, Wisconsin has lost their starting quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke. Not saying it's going to be an easy game, and Rutgers never beat them. UCLA is not very good, although they did hang with LSU on the road a little bit yesterday. It was 17-17 at one point. They lost 34-17. USC loses at the Big House to Michigan. They're not invincible. And Nebraska lost this weekend at Illinois, which is, Illinois and Rutgers are very similar type teams. So, listen, there's everything's still on the table. And maybe everybody got nervous yesterday, but it's over. They won. You move on. And I think parents can relate to what that game felt like when you have close calls with your kids, and it's like, okay, move on to the next one. You avoided disaster, and that's what Rutgers did. And there's something really positive about that. And I think that now October and then November, I mean, I've talked about it. Obviously, the Illinois game looks tougher, but Minnesota at home, Minnesota at home at Maryland, Illinois at home at Michigan State. I mean, there is no game left on their schedule that they can't win. Now, they could lose every game too. I mean, just in terms of the matchups, a game of inches, and that's what it's going to come down to in a lot of these games. And it's unlikely they can run the table, and it's obviously unlikely they're going to lose them all. And there's going to be some mix in between. But right now, what they've been through, and all the adversity also in the preseason with injuries and this team has been through a lot in the first month. And now you have a chance to go in front of your home crowd, what should be a sellout, hopefully, a blackout crowd, and the chance to go 4-0. It's a huge, in terms of how many veterans and leaders are on this team, to be able to emotionally adjust to this game from Saturday's win. It was kind of a roller coaster, and now you need to settle down and really lock in, and you need to get a win on Friday to just bolster everything. And don't worry about the AP votes. I know they got some coaches' votes and all that, but who cares? Honestly, the AP poll does nothing for you right now. Winning does, and getting better does. And that's what this team needs to focus on. And as fans, let's just lap it up. I mean, listen, we're have reasons to be excited. And if you can get through September undefeated, the juice is just going to keep flowing. And overall, I just think there's a lot of things to like about this team and why they're different than last year. Callie McManus in the pass game, I think, the run game can be more dynamic now with Sam Brown if he can stay healthy. The offensive line, they had their struggles at times yesterday, but that was a good test for them. And, I think you're going to see a better performance from them on Friday. And I think they're a unit that can continue to get better with that cohesiveness that they have. And defensively, they a lot of younger guys got experience, and you saw yesterday. I mean, Abram Wright made a big play on special teams. Bo Mascow made a couple of big plays. Kaj Sanders has flashed at times. In terms of Eric Rogers, he has stepped up. He made a big play yesterday. So you're seeing guys that have had opportunity this year, making a difference on defense. And now you have your gang back together with Powell and Jabome. Obviously had a big play yesterday with that forced fumble. You're seeing other guys be contributors to this defense. This defense does have a chance to be better than last year. It's a lot has to go right, but they do. So I think overall, the ceiling of this team is still very high, and expectations should be high. And that's when they almost blow a game. Yeah, it's fair to be really upset, but I think looking through the clouds now, there's a lot still to be very positive about. And the coaching staff, they're still learning too. And I think, again, I go back to Greg Schiano's belief in this team and how he's been calling the games so far this season. And I do think it's a little different. I think he's more aggressive in a good way. Obviously, you got to pick your spots. I think he won't admit it, but decision-making wise, he's going to evaluate some things he did. But I think overall, the belief in this team, the confidence in this team, the trust in this team is really high. And that bodes really well for the potential of this team. Thanks so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful Podcast. Talk to you soon.